The Prime Minister is writing to the EU to formally ask for Brexit to be postponed until June the 30th or longer. The chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, told Theresa May that when she comes to Brussels on Thursday, she must explain what sort of Brexit extension she really wants and why. But that's not going to be an easy task for Mrs May, with her cabinet divided over whether a long extension is acceptable and Parliament gridlocked after the Speaker warned that he might not allow a further vote on Brexit without substantial changes. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. It's a bit of a mess.
Just a bit. The Prime Minister told Cabinet today that Parliament was a laughingstock in the nation. I'm not sure the Cabinet's in particularly great nick. What she did at the Cabinet today was go round, let everybody say their piece on what they thought about the idea of an extension to the Brexit deadline. And people spoke in a way that suggested that some of them would find it extremely difficult to tolerate staying inside the government if we were to move to a longer extension. Theresa May at the end didn't feel that she could draw it all together and say, right, this is what we're doing. But what we think she's doing with that letter she said she will write, doesn't look like it's going to be written today, looks like it's being put off till tomorrow, is ask the EU, can you give me a short extension so that I've got it there in case my deal passes next week and we can tidy it all up with a bit of law, but maybe for my back pocket can I have a long extension? But the EU are absolutely stipulating, playing quite hardball today with their statements, saying if you have a long extension, you need to be promising us that you're going to be doing something spectacular with that extension. You're going to be having a general election. You're going to be having a second referendum. You're going to be committing absolutely to parliamentary votes maybe that could only come up with a softer form of Brexit than the one that an awful lot of people in that cabinet and the Conservative Party want. So all of that is happening there, and it looks as though the deadline is taking shape, the schedule, the timetable for next week, and this is pretty extraordinary. The vote, the meaningful vote, could be preceded by a test of strength in the House of Commons to make sure that the Speaker is moved out of the way in his objections, with the vote itself, the meaningful vote, on Thursday, the day before we are meant to leave. If Theresa May lost on Thursday, could she reach across the table and pick up that document that takes you to a long extension, or would it be dashed from her hands by cabinet ministers who say this is all over? Would we be members of Europe on the Friday? Would we be dropping out without a deal? Would the Speaker stand up and say you're in contempt if we don't move to something else? We are in an extraordinary situation, which I think right now makes next week look as though it's going to make this week's constitutional crisis of the last 24 hours look a bit like a tea party.
Good afternoon, Chief Whip.
The Chief Whip looked a tortured soul. He hasn't got the votes for the deal.
Are you trying to delay Brexit?
And the Speaker has put a question mark next to the vote itself. The ministers said that problem will be overcome.
I generally don't think the Speaker's intervention has changed much. It might change how he's viewed in the eyes of the public, but I don't think it's changed much how he's viewed in the eyes of parliamentarians.
Why did the Prime Minister want to talk to you, Mr Johnson?
MPs like Boris Johnson were called in and asked what changes could lure them over to the Prime Minister's side. The cabinet he walked out of last summer argued for 90 minutes over the letter Theresa May is sending to the EU asking for an extension to the Brexit date. Andrew Leadsom said he wasn't sure it looked like the cabinet that would implement Brexit anymore. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, insisted Theresa May must spell out what kind of delay she wants to the Brexit date and exactly why she wants it.
All I would say is it is our duty to ask whether this extension would be useful, because an extension will be something which will extend uncertainty, and that uncertainty costs. It has a cost for everybody, and we can't prolong uncertainty without having a good reason for it.
Michel Barnier said any long extension, which Theresa May could end up needing if her deal fails to pass next week, should be tied to a general election, a second referendum, or a commitment to seeking a new, softer approach to Brexit in Parliament. The Speaker's intervention yesterday was thought to have raised the odds of a longer extension.
And I wish you a good day. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
Traitor! Traitor!
Very much indeed.
That could frighten some Brexiteers into folding their resistance to Theresa May's deal, but not all of them.
For me, in my constituency, most definitely not.
You couldn't support a long extension?
We've been telling people for so long and so many times that the 29th of March was the exit date, and I think if we were to go much past that, then there'll be real disappointment, and who knows what that would do.
If they're going to be holding a long extension over us as some kind of threat, it's actually better than being in the withdrawal agreement.
But not all your fellow Brexiteers agree with that at all, do
well,
they?
maybe if they gave it some thought, they would come to that conclusion.
The focus is still on winning over the DUP, in the hope they bring Tory rebels with them. But the Chief Whip told the Prime Minister yesterday there weren't enough who'd follow the DUP lead, even if it happened. No DUP, no Eddie Hughes.
Definitely the case, because I wouldn't be convinced without them, certainly. And there may be still an element of convincing required once they are on board, but I'd certainly be feeling much more optimistic about it.
I think that the DUP are unlikely to be persuaded, but if they were, I would personally still not regard the deal as one that is worth supporting.
Mr Tusk, is yesterday's news a problem?
A slight grimace from European Council President Donald Tusk, hosted for talks in Dublin today by the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. The Irish government amongst those insisting Britain must now deliver a detailed plan if it wants an extension to the Brexit date, knowing full well, as events run away from the government in London, Theresa May doesn't have a detailed plan and is living day to day.
Well, we're now joined by two Conservative MPs, Nicky Morgan and Dominic Grieve. Let me just start with you, Dominic Grieve. Forgive me for a moment, it's rude, but there it is. Place this. What is happening to this country? This is the country's destiny at stake.
It is, and it's a serious situation, but it's happened because the Prime Minister has been unable to get the support of the House of Commons for her deal. That's the basic source of the difficulty, and she hasn't really shown up to now any sign of trying to change her policy, to reorientate it to achieve that support. We are now running out of time. There is clearly an opportunity to extend Article 50. I would be very surprised if our EU partners were to deny that to us. But we are going to have to extend Article 50, and then we are going to have to
How long?
work. Well, I suspect the EU will insist on it being quite a long extension. Because
a couple of years?
Not sure it'd be as long as that, but I certainly don't think it's a few months, because from their point of view, the last thing they want is for us to hit another brick wall and be in danger of falling off a cliff edge in the middle of the EU parliamentary elections. So I think they will insist that it's 9 or 12 months, and that does give us an opportunity to reset. But will we take it? We will only take it if there is a willingness to start having a proper debate in Parliament and the House of Commons about alternatives, because I don't think the Prime Minister's deal is going to get the majority support in the House of Commons.
Nicky Morgan, this does put the Prime Minister herself in the crosshairs.
Yeah.
And the question is, should she really go on? Isn't it time now for somebody else to take this on?
Well, I'm not sure that time is now, given the critical stage that we are at. I think it is very clear that the Prime Minister is not the person to lead us should we get to phase 2 of this. I mean, this is only the withdrawal phase. We've got a whole future relationship to negotiate, and I don't think the Prime Minister is the person to do that because of everything that's happened now. I mean, I was horrified just listening to what Gary Gibbon was saying about the Prime Minister apparently describing Parliament as a laughingstock. There's no doubt about it. We haven't reached an agreement to support or approval for her agreement, but Parliament was denied a vote on that agreement back in December. It was then put to us in January, where I was happy to vote for it, but people did not. Then we've waited and waited and waited for a new strategy. We're asked again, no approval. We're waiting now. It's over 24 hours since the Speaker's ruling yesterday. We are still waiting to know what the government's next steps are, and if they are going to ask for an extension of Article 50, what is the purpose of that extension?
Why should people have any confidence that somebody who has presided over 2.5 years of no progress can in some way suddenly make progress given a few months by the EU?
Well, she's not a magician, the Prime Minister, and there is a fundamental problem, which is that when confronted with the realities of Brexit, as opposed to its theoretical possibilities, parliamentarians are not happy with what they see for a variety of reasons. That's why my view is you have to have a reset of this debate, which is of a fundamental character. Now, my views have been pretty consistent. I always thought this was going to happen, or there was a risk of it happening. It may be Parliament can come to an agreement on some other form of Brexit, but otherwise the only solution is to take this back to the public, which is why I've always supported a further referendum, because I see it as a way of breaking that logjam.
Right.
Obviously, I'm a Remainer, but I do accept that if the public want to leave, say, on the Prime Minister's terms, then leave on those terms we must, and very quickly.
Well, now, the idea of the meaningful vote on the very eve of the day that we're supposed to leave, that's surely nonsense, isn't it?
Well, I'm afraid this whole situation is so unprecedented that I think anything could happen, but it is absolutely jaw-dropping. And I do think that the country is watching horror-struck at the lack of decision from Westminster. I think it's not just Parliament, it is also from ministers and from the government in terms of the terms of our withdrawal. There is an agreement on the table, it is not perfect, and one of the concerns has been that MPs are, each time we're voting, trying to sort of second guess where we get to, rather than voting on the agreement and the wider issue of this country needing a stable government. People are still indulging in what they would like in terms of their perfect Brexit or no Brexit, rather than what the country needs. It needs certainty.
Can you have a stable government with a party that is in such shambles? I mean, I know both parties are in a bit of a shambles, but yours is in a particular shambles.
Well, ours is certainly in a bad way. Labour are also in a very bad way. I think I wouldn't.
I said that.
I wouldn't underestimate that.
No.
But I agree with you. There is a fundamental problem. We have a parliamentary system, and that parliamentary system at the moment is not delivering clear majorities on the single major plank of the government's policy. But before one starts to criticise MPs, and I say this even of my colleagues in the ERG, it is a very difficult decision. This decision is going to be for a very long time. And the deal has many flaws. Now, that may be an argument we should still sign up to this deal, but I have to say I don't criticise colleagues for pointing out that it doesn't in any way match the fantasies that were being peddled in the 2016 referendum.
Dominic Grieve, Nicky Morgan, thank you very much indeed.